Mm.
Hi guys, and welcome to how to live stream Q&A webinar for today. My name is Matt.
And I'm George. We're both with Epiphan Video, and we have been getting questions galore, right, Matt?
Absolutely. Of course, in these trying times and this thrust to be changed into the online world, we certainly have a lot more questions than normal and certainly a lot more information out there that people are looking to get the appropriate answers. But you don't necessarily want to navigate a 30-page document as an example to get what you need. So George and I
hmm
are here to help you that.
I'm just looking at Crowdcast here, which is the app that you signed in this morning to watch this webinar, and I'm seeing all kinds of people saying hi from all over the world. So it's great to see so many people from everywhere trying to do streaming, and hopefully we can be of a little bit of help today. Um,
If you
we'll
guys
wait.
do
We'll
have
wait a few more
questions,
minutes before we jump into the presentation part because we know people are going to be late to join us here. I'm sure, but
it does happen. And if you guys do have questions, there is an ask question section at the bottom, and we may or may not be throwing up a few polls throughout this webinar. So please feel free to participate in that as well.
yeah, the polls are kind of fun just to see what other people are up to and get a sense of if we get a sense of who you are in a general way, the audience, then we can try to speak to that crowd because sometimes we have people who are doing really high advanced level setups, and then we have other people who are just getting started. So it'll help us sort of cater the content towards you.
Absolutely.
So how's life with you these days, Matt? Everything good?
Not too bad. Live streaming is always a challenge. So we're doing live streaming remotely from a few different locations today to make this webinar work, and
Yes.
it's been pretty smooth so far. How about yourself?
Yeah.
How's the live streaming world on your side?
Well, I must say it's been going pretty well. We've been doing quite a few webinars, and we have our weekly live show, which we'll be doing
Hmm.
today at 3 o'clock. In fact, so shortly after this broadcast, we'll be going live onto YouTube and Facebook for a little bit more of a fun live show about conferencing, comparing conferencing software versus live streaming, because a lot of people have some confusion about those two technologies. So we'll be talking about that on YouTube and Facebook later today. So if you're still looking for more information, tune into that.
Yep. And if you also have any general questions that you want to throw at ourselves, the team, so I'm a member of the technical support team, you can always ask your questions at info@epiphan.com. And if it's questions pertaining to hardware versus software encoding, what might be the best tools that you can utilize for your webinar or your online lecture, um, drop us a line there. We're happy to give you assistance however we can.
Awesome. So I see a couple of questions already in the Crowdcast app, which is great. Add those questions in there. We will get to them. We're going to do a presentation off the top here. We'll get started in a moment. And then we will spend as much time as we need on these questions to get them answered. We've scheduled an hour for the webinar today. We'll go a little bit longer if we need to, but we thought maybe it would be helpful just to run through a kind of a how-to live stream presentation for you so you can get the quick setup so you can get off to the races, and then we'll look at your questions.
It seems pretty
So,
fair.
sounds good to you, man? Okay.
Good to me.
So, if we load up our slide deck, we can have a look at what we want to talk about today. Like I said, it's how to live stream. It's a Q&A, and we're going to cover, well, a couple of different things. We're going to go over the basic streaming setup. We'll
We're also going to
do
talk about a couple of advanced streaming setups, how it might differ from a simple camera and microphone, and of course, answering questions.
exactly. So, Matt, why don't you kick us off with a basic streaming setup? So, let's say I'm coming to you and I'm saying, what do I do? I want to get started. I've never done any of this.
Right. So there's a few things that you need to consider. There's the video that comes from either an internal webcam on, let's say, a laptop or a tablet, or you can use an external webcam, something that might be USB. There's also audio options to consider as well. So at a very, very basic setup, if you can't afford to go out and buy equipment, you've got the webcam that's on your laptop specifically, and there's an onboard microphone that can kind of help you do that, or an audio type device. You can also use things like a headset. So the headset, relatively inexpensive, gives you confidence monitoring for audio through those headphones and being able to use that microphone directly there. And there's might not be any additional software that's really needed for this. So typically, if you're using a webcam, there's an option to go live directly within certain browsers like Google Chrome for Facebook and for YouTube. So those might be an option for a bare bones minimum introduction to live streaming.
Perfect. And we are assuming most people here are looking to do live streaming beyond what they could do with their phone. So we'll focus most of the presentation today on how to use other gear if you want a bit of a more professional setup.
Absolutely.
Um, so then what if you want a bit more from your live stream? You want multi-cameras, you want titles, you want higher quality.
Right.
Let's
And
talk about some of those things.
Right. So, I mean, first and foremost, having an updated camera is always better because you'll be able to have a little bit more control over that video signal. George, as a camera and a photographer and videographer, you can speak a little bit more about some of those different settings and how they might, benefit for the quality of a video source. I'm an audio guy, so I don't know much in terms of ISOs and f-stop
Well,
and that
sure.
kind of
So
thing.
let's talk a little bit just about cameras and audio then, because those are the two of the biggest considerations that everyone's going to be thinking about right now. We've already got some questions in here about microphones, so we'll answer that in a moment.
Mhm.
But in terms of cameras, really, the better camera, the higher quality camera you can afford, you're going to get a better image for your live stream. It's just like any other kind of video application. There's a few caveats when it comes to live streaming, though, in that you need a camera that has a clean HDMI out, so that it has an HDMI out port on the camera. So
Mhm.
like an SLR or a camcorder, that you'll find that little port on it. And what I mean by clean is when it comes out of the camera, it doesn't have overlay information. It doesn't show like framing or other data on that screen. So a nice clean
Right.
signal coming out of your camera. We often recommend the small mirrorless cameras like the Sony A6300 or camcorders to get started. A lot of the Canon camcorders have been really good for us.
Yeah. Panasonic
You
produce
must have
pretty good
other
as well.
cameras that you recommend to people, Matt, who call looking for a first time camera.
A lot of people have been focusing a lot on the Canon and the Panasonic camcorders if they're looking for a more
Sure.
handheld option. We have a lot of people that are also using their DSLR cameras, which can be a good choice for a certain amount of time. But depending on the DSLR or the company that makes that specific camera, you might run into a certain few hiccups in between. And some of that would be that most cameras will sit on standby where they're actually actively outputting an HDMI signal for a little while. But after a certain amount of time, and this could be 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, the camera will actually turn itself off. And so the DSLR might not always be the best choice in those circumstances. And if you have a DSLR and you want to try that, using HDMI out to a television as an example will give you the opportunity to just leave it on standby and see how long it takes if the camera is going to turn itself off. It's also a great way to find out if the output of your camera is clean.
Yeah. So it's pretty easy to test those cameras and find out if they're going to work for you. Try the cameras you have, and then we have plenty of resources on our website how to choose a camera for live streaming. There's many articles on that. So pop by epiphan.com and visit our blog section and look for those articles. They should point you to specific models that we personally like. In today's webinar, I'm using my webcam built into my laptop. So um, I'm hopeful to get another camera set up in here, a little mirrorless camera, so I get a nice cleaner image, higher resolution, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Uh,
I'm using an external USB camera that I've connected to my laptop for this presentation. So I'm specifically using a C920 from Logitech. It's a very good camera. It does full HD at 60 hertz and can do up to 60 frames per second as well. So you're noticing a pretty clean look. But I previously used a USB capture card connected to a computer and an external camera as well, which does give a little bit more elevated of a presentation and quality. And also, you have a lot more versatility out of that. You can put it on a tripod, you can move it around, and you can also connect things like external microphones.
yeah, yeah. Well, you look great.
Thank you.
From my end, I think you look really nice and well dressed as well. So what can I say? Um,
Comes with the gig.
we have one of our questions. So, like I said, ask your questions in the Crowdcast app, and we'll try to answer them there. I noticed Fod asked a question about choosing a microphone for live streaming. What recommendations or advice would you have for choosing audio?
Sure. So having a clean audio setup is the most important. So having a room that you can have control over for what kind of noise is around is going to be the most beneficial.
What
But
do you mean by
microphones,
that? Sorry, what do you mean by the room that you have control over? What does that mean?
oh sure. So I'm in a room right now that's an enclosed space, and I've got a green screen behind me that kind of acts a little bit as an acoustic dampening. So it kind of prevents echo and reverberations from happening. So it makes the room easier to get a nice, clean, proper sound. But I'm using, as an example, I'm using an SM57 microphone. So a professional level microphone that has an XLR output that goes into an audio capture card into my computer. Now, this can be an expensive setup, but it can also be a complicated setup, but it doesn't need to be complicated either. There are a number of different solutions out there, including USB microphones that do a fantastic job at giving you what you want. So a company that we often hear about is like Blue. So Blue makes like the Blue Yeti microphone, which has a bunch of different options for polar patterns. So which direction is that audio going to be able to be captured from? You can change the volume and the sensitivity to that. And it's just a simple one microphone into your computer and a couple of different settings that you can tweak to get that really nice sound. If you're
Hmm.
looking for a larger, more upscaled sound, you might see something like at a concert, right? Where you might have an audio board involved. And then from there, I'm sure, George, you've seen a few concerts in your time where you've seen multiple different microphones that are coming within to a single board.
That's right. So a lot of people will use a small mixer in addition to their audio equipment because mixers are just designed for giving you great control over that audio signal. Inevitably, you'll have some situation where you either need phantom power for your mic, or you want to control the gain to match it with other signals that you're mixing in. Maybe you're playing videos alongside uh, your microphone feed as well. So you're going to need good control over that. So we always encourage people, invest in your audio. Pay more attention to your audio than your video. It's not that video doesn't matter. It's just that poor audio is intolerable in a live stream from a
Mhm.
viewer side of you. If the audio is terrible, you really can't watch it. But for video, you can kind of get away with it. So I'm using a USB microphone, as Matt talked about. I ordered this one. It's I don't even know what brand it is. I couldn't get a Blue Yeti because they're all sold out right now. But I found this one, and so far it seems to be working in, and it's USB straight into my computer for live streaming. So that's it, the most straightforward setup you can probably get.
Yep.
But getting a little mixer or a preamp, some other way to get control over that audio would certainly be a nice boost.
Yeah. So USB is a great introductory way if you're not looking to spend a ton of money. And then, getting a USB capture card if it's going into a computer is another great way to do it. Some brands that I know that I talk of often would be something like Roland, Focusrite, or the older brands for M Audio.
Hmm.
They're all great devices. They're USB that connect to your computer, and then they give you an XLR input on the front so you can connect a more professional or prosumer level microphone to get better control over your audio. And
Sure.
then, of course, you have the more elaborate and extensive setups where you might have multiple audio sources and microphones that are coming into a board that are going externally to a bunch of different options that are then going into a computer. So it can be anywhere from a few dollars, a couple dozen dollars to thousands upon thousands of dollars. But
Hmm.
if you don't have the ability to get an external audio setup, when you're investing in your camera, make sure that your camera has an option for a microphone in. And at which point you can connect a microphone directly to that camera and then just go HDMI or SDI out from your camera to an audio capture card into your computer.
That might be my favorite recommendation for getting people streaming is get their audio into their camera. It's just one less thing to worry about. It's one feed into your streaming encoder, which we'll talk about in a moment, whether that's a computer or a piece of hardware.
Mhm.
We do have some questions coming in, which is great. I also encourage you, if you're watching this, to upvote the questions that you think are most relevant to our crowd here today. So you can do that throughout the Crowdcast app if you click on the Ask a Question button below, and there's a way to upvote those questions. So please use that.
Mhm.
Lots of great questions so far. We talked about microphones, what kind of microphones to use. I have another question here, which we'll just jump right into, which is cables. How long can an HDMI be before having issues? How about a wireless HDMI transmitter? Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about HDMI connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different properties for different types of cables. HDMI is an example, the standard off the shelf consumer ones that you can find pretty much anywhere, including dollar stores. You're probably not going to want to go longer than 10, maybe 15 feet. There are different types of HDMI cables. There are directional cables where one end is a source and the other one is a viewer. So you'll be able to see they're accurately um, marked on either end. Those directional cables tend to be able to go longer distances. You'll see them more commonly at 25, 50, and we've seen even in some cases they go about 100 feet, but those ones tend to be optical HDMI. So I'd recommend that if you're doing any sort of configuration that will have either a very long cable run or that you have some, let's say, obstacles in the way that require you having to maneuver around specific things with longer cable runs in general, you're going to want to make sure that that quality can stay at its highest integrity. And what I mean by that is you can use something like a wireless HDMI repeater or sender. The issues with that is you're going to run into is interference, right? It can be interference from Wi-Fi signals, from other Bluetooth devices, that could basically cause the signal to be weaker and not reach the other side on time or in a way that looks correct.
Uh,
There are
just so you
certainly
know,
other
Matt, there is some kind of a video issue happening right now on the stream. So we apologize to anybody who's watching right now. We're going to keep plowing ahead here, and hopefully our audio is consistent. And it looks like we're having intermittent issues, but it seems to be back right now. So sorry about that to everybody who's watching, but from what I can see right now, it looks pretty good.
All right. So sorry about that. If you're doing a longer cable run and you have the ability to convert something to, let's say, HDMI to like an Ethernet or a Cat5 or a Cat6 cable to run at a longer distance, that's one way of doing it. Typically, if you're going to be running long distances with video, we'll often recommend using an SDI type video source and cable rather than HDMI, as they're able to run very, very long distances without impedance or without any greater issue.
Yeah. SDI is the greatest. I love SDI. I wish all cameras had all SDI and HDMI was not around because it's just so great. We did a whole show on that on our YouTube channel, which you can check out. We also talked about wireless HDMI transmission as well. So you can find a lot of information on our YouTube channel. So please go have a look after this webinar. What do you think, Matt? More questions, or should we keep going through the presentation?
I gotta say, I am curious a little bit about some of these questions. There's one that I saw here that someone was asking, and George, maybe this is something you can speak to a little bit. Is someone's asking, how about a GoPro camera for a video source?
Sure. Yeah, we use them all the time. We tend to use them for secondary cameras because they're really good at that wide angle view. And for a shot like you and I right now, I mean, you can get away with that shot. They do get a bit narrower, but they do a nice clean output on them. And as far as I can tell, they're great. You have no audio, of course, or if there is audio, I would not go near it with a 10-foot pole. But for a video input, I think it'd be fine. But maybe, I mean, I always see them as a secondary source because they've got that very particularly wide angle.
True, but from what I understand, there's also other lenses that you can purchase for GoPro to make it a
Oh,
more
cool.
flat.
I haven't played around with that yet. So, okay. So why don't we carry on with our presentation a little bit, and then we'll come back to some more of those questions.
Absolutely.
Because we've got loads of time here. So getting back to our equipment, we talked about you need a video and audio source, and then you need a video encoder. So Matt, what would be the kinds of encoders people are looking at when they're hearing about this? What do you need to tell them?
Sure. So there are basically two major different types of encoders. They're all pieces of hardware, certainly, but there are encoders that are meant to be used with software solutions for live streaming. So something like a USB capture card that's going to your computer to be used in software like, let's say, OBS or vMix. And then we also have dedicated hardware solution, or also known as standalone hardware solutions. This is where you might have your video and audio sources or multiple video and audio sources going into this dedicated piece of device that connects directly to the internet and streams directly to that end destination. So we could compare this as an example, our AVIO as a USB capture card that to use in software compared to our Pearl Mini. So the Pearl Mini can take multiple video and audio sources simultaneously, while the AVIO or most USB capture cards will be able to take one, maybe two video sources with embedded audio. So no dedicated audio line through the USB capture card.
Right. Okay. We'll jump into more encoder stuff afterwards. So then you've got an encoder decision to make, whether you're going to do software encoding on a computer or a hardware encoder. And then you need to figure out your streaming destination. So where are you going to stream to? That's pretty straightforward too. Sorry, that part is pretty straightforward, just choosing where your audience is. We often choose to stream to multiple places. We stream to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, sometimes all at the same time. So you can get more of an audience that way.
Yep, and Vimeo is also starting to be a lot more popular as well, but you also just need to make sure that if you want to stream using Vimeo, you have to purchase a business account essentially.
Sure, for professional or corporate use, I highly recommend that platform. It's pretty affordable for what you get as well.
Right. But not only do you really need like a streaming destination, right? So being able to go to that content delivery network, but you're also going to need to make sure that you can support a stream to that destination. Mm-hmm. So the larger, more important segment that we need to speak to is being able to have a stable and a strong internet connection.
That's right. Bandwidth. There's a little diagram here you can look at and see how to compute your bandwidth. And again, you can look this up after the presentation and find out how to compute your own bandwidth in terms of what you want to do. But what's your sort of go-to reference point? You say you need X many megabits per second upload speed, Matt.
Right. I usually say that whatever you're looking to stream as the amount. So let's say, as a general guideline, if I'm doing like a 720p stream, I'll usually aim somewhere between 2000 and 4000 kilobits per second. So we'll say 3000 as a rounder. And then you need to make sure that you have about an extra half of that for your headroom, right? Because there's going to be some fluctuation within the internet bandwidth that you have, or you might have other users that are jumping on the network. So if you were streaming at 3000 kilobits per second, you need to make sure that you have 1.5 times that. So you'd want to make sure that you have at least 4,500 kilobits per second of dedicated upload speed to do that.
And
One
then, so how do people find that out? What's that? Tell them that shortcut just to find out their internet speed.
Sure. So there are a lot of places and websites that you can go to that can check your internet speeds. So speedtest.net is a very commonly used one. And
Mhm.
what I usually recommend to do is to run 5 or 6 different speed tests and see what your downloads and upload speeds are and find somewhere that middle ground. A lot of people love to watch the needle kind of go up and all the way to see what its highest point is. But the key point where you're going to see what your average is going to be where it kind of floats between before it starts rising. So you might have a maximum of, let's say, 130 down and 10 up. But for a most part, before it started rising, it was sitting at about 70 down and maybe 4 up. So you'll have a better idea that as an average, you're probably looking at about 4 megabits per second of upload speed available. Um, it does take a little bit of trial and error, and knowing the amount of bandwidth that you need can sometimes be a little tricky. If you're not 100% sure what encoding settings you should be using, what sort of bandwidth you might have available, most content delivery networks, so YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, will often have an FAQ that will actually give you some general guidelines as to what they would like to see
Yeah.
for each resolution.
Or they'll tell you during your stream, your internet really stinks right now. This is not going to go very well. You'll get that feedback pretty quickly, but that's not when you want to get that feedback. So we have more. Why don't we jump back into some more of these questions here? There's lots of good ones coming in. So someone's asking if they should go with a hardware mixer or a software-based solution. So actually, we have some supporting graphics. Maybe I'll pull up the slides again to show some of those diagrams. So maybe can you give the rundown of the capture card solution? So what I'm showing on the screen is we've got 2 cameras and an audio mixer going into capture cards.
Right.
Uh, and you need capture cards to bring those signals into your computer with software encoder, like vMix going to YouTube.
Yeah, and when someone asks if a software solution or hardware solution would be better suited for their needs, it depends a lot on your specific budget. However, uh, when you have a software solution, you have a lot of other factors that you need to consider. How strong is your computer? Is it strong enough to be able to support doing the live streaming, being able to run those applications at the same time? Can it handle multiple USB grabbers or audio or video sources simultaneously? You start running to a higher chance of failure, essentially, right? The more complicated the setup, the more load you put onto that system, the more chances you're going to run into issues or have hiccups throughout that specific process. When you have a dedicated hardware encoder, right, something like Pearl, or some of the other hardware encoders that are available on the market, it tends to be more reliable because they've been designed and built to handle that specific job. And that's its only job that it's meant to do. It'll take those video and audio sources, you can combine them and create those custom layups and that setup. It tends to look a little bit cleaner. It tends to be a little bit easier to use because you don't have to learn how to use that specific software. And at the end of the day, it's going to give you way less of a chance for failure because as the system was built and designed around doing that
Mhm.
specific task, you're not going to have to worry about the system load being too high, it suddenly dropping frames, or that it stops working altogether. So
Yeah,
there's kind of a little bit of a trade-off. And the hardware
I've
might
used both.
cost you a little bit more, but that cost to reliability versus not knowing if you need to invest in a more expensive computer, into other essential USB grabber cards, maybe you need to update more camera gear. Suddenly, it's costing you almost the same to get possibly less reliable result.
Mhm. I can say just from personal experience, I've used both and they both work great. The nice thing about software is that there's so many great plugins, or if there's some system you want to tie it into, it's going to be quick
Not
for
sure
getting
what
that.
happened there, George. I'm not hearing you at all there. I'm not sure if that's on my side or yours.
Okay, let me know if you can't hear me
Oh,
on the
we're okay.
production team, maybe. Are you all good, Matt?
Yeah, I think that was my side.
Oh, okay,
Apologies.
great. So yeah, software is kind of fun to play with. There's lots of ways sorry, I hit my mic, to make it work with your systems. But I've also had my biggest failures on software. where the Windows computer I'm working on decides to suddenly update, or the software itself will crash on me. I mean, OBS is a great platform, but I do find it's kind of a crash prone. So when we use the hardware encoders, it just kind of minimizes those risks. So if you really are concerned about reliability, they do seem to help in that way. Why don't we jump back into these other questions? So Tom is asking us, how are we doing the countdown timer? So at the beginning of this broadcast, we had a countdown timer, like counting down, saying stream is starting soon, and then at 0 we switched it to a different layout showing you and I here.
Right. Yes.
And we use that same with all the graphics on this program. We're using a program called New Blue Titler Live. New Blue Effects is a graphic company. Here it is. Cameron's just throwing it up on the screen for you to take a look at it, where we can set up a timer. So any kind of graphics software built for live streaming should have some kind of timer function.
Yeah. And there are other ways that you can also do this. This can be done from additional software purposes, or it can be done uh, using an external video source. Like maybe you just have a countdown timer set on a separate laptop source, and that's just being used as a video source within a hardware encoder.
Sure. There's another question in here. Someone says, I can see a lip sync problem. What's the cause of this and how do you correct it? That's from Muhammad. Matt,
So
do you want to handle that?
there's a number of different possibilities from that. So locally, if you're using a hardware device or using multiple different USB based devices into a computer, an AV sync can essentially occur, right? And this is just where information is being passed through more quickly in one method versus the other. Dedicated hardware devices should have options to be able to add latency or delay between audio so that it brings the video back within sync. Now, typically, if you're doing, let's say, a live stream and your video and audio is within sync, but then it starts to change over time, that usually tends to be more an issue with the network, right? And this might not be your local network. This could be if you're streaming to, let's say, YouTube. If there are hundreds of thousands of people that are uploading and live streaming content simultaneously, there might be enough traffic on that network that it will slow it down just enough to just kind of break that AV sync.
Oh,
And unfortunately, when
cool.
that happens, there's not much that we can really do from our side.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if it is your local network that's causing the issue where you're having an AV sync break, it might just mean that you're trying to push too much information or your bitrate is too high for your network or your bandwidth to support. So there's a few things. It might be a little bit of trial and error at first if you're not 100% certain if your network can handle it. But that's why it's also super important to be prepared, run tests, run practice run throughs, even if it means you're streaming to YouTube to nobody as an unlisted event that you can just trial and error it a few times until you can get all those kinks kind of worked out.
Yeah. We have another question from Andrew asking, is NDI going to be the future standard for multi-camera streaming?
I think that NDI is more a solution for a less complicated setup. A lot of people are using NDI in larger venues because it provides them the opportunity of not having 1,000 cables that they have to run, 50 to 100 to 200 feet. Nobody really wants to have a nest of SDI cables or HDMI cables running through the wall, through the floor, through the ceiling. So an NDI provides an opportunity to remove those cables altogether and run over the local network.
Hmm. I'd answer that and say some kind of network-based um, streaming is going to be the standard. It could be NDI, but there's a lot of other standards coming out as well to get video signals over a network. NDI seems to be leading that charge, which is great. We're big fans of it here, but it's early. And so it's kind of fun and exciting to see all these new technologies pop up. I know people who have had great success with it. I know people who won't go near it with a 10-foot pole. So I've heard both sides of that story for different reasons, but it's pretty exciting. I know NDI's got a lot of content coming out that we're going to be a part of on their channel soon. So you'll see us there. Why don't we jump? So just don't forget to upvote these questions in this poll and in this Crowdcast, because it's great to see all these nice questions here. There's also some polls in here. So please consider answering some of these polls and we'll get some information like how would you rate your live streaming skill level? We have kind of a mix of people who say they're beginner, intermediate, and with a few people advanced. So more beginners and intermediates here.
Hmm.
And another question, this one I find interesting, Matt. Someone's saying, how do you encode your stream? Webcam or hardware encoder or streaming software? I'm actually surprised to see most people are using a hardware encoder, only because we know the popularity of streaming software, don't you think?
It's true, but again, it all comes down to what can your system do, right? A lot of
Sure.
people may not be spending $3,000, $4,000 on a computer or a laptop, and as soon as you start having, maybe a $300 to $500 laptop, you start realizing that this is a great computer for my everyday use to be able to check emails and stay in touch with friends and watch videos, but it might not be the right solution to actually capture video and audio content for live streaming. And even if we look at the platform of Twitch as an example, which is incredibly popular for every life hobbies, for video gamers, for vloggers, that it's a growing popularity as it continues to spike throughout this social isolation period. A lot of people are using separate dedicated computers to run the software that they're doing with streaming with OBS. So
Mhm.
even as a software option, they're still technically using a hardware solution as a separate computer to get all of that done.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of a strange distinction, hardware versus software. They're both software running on a piece of hardware. They're in fact identical. They're just a different arrangement, right?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. We have another question here. This is a good one. How do you stream to multiple destinations at the same time? This is from Michael Eggleton.
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually is a very good question. So there are, if we're looking at it, if we're still talking about software a little bit, there are software applications that you can utilize. Those ones tend to be more paid applications, like vMix and Wirecast, that allow you to stream to multiple destinations simultaneously using the same encoding settings and video sources that you're using within that specific software. Typically, it gives you different options. It could be a standard RTMP and a stream key option information, or it will just give you a bunch of different lines or a preset destination where it say, hey, you can jump, stream to vMix, or sorry, stream to Vimeo, and then also stream to, let's say, Twitter. For hardware encoders, something like, I can speak to our Pearl family products as an example. They have an option where you can select your streaming protocol. So typically, if you're streaming to a destination like YouTube or Facebook using RTMP push or RTMPS push, and you can simply create multiple different instances and select the destinations that you'd like to
Mhm.
go to. Now, I don't know about you, George, but streaming to multiple destinations is great, but what can we expect in terms of bandwidth at that point?
Well, that's the biggest consideration, whether you use a local multi-stream solution. So let's say it's your computer or your hardware encoder, you want to send up two completely independent streams, one to YouTube and one to Facebook, let's say. You're going to need double the amount of bandwidth for that because they both need a big pipe to get all that data up there.
Mhm.
Which is the advantage of the restreaming application. You send up a single stream to somebody in the cloud, and then from the cloud, they then can push that out to multiple streams. I've also heard the argument, however, doing a restreaming application, you have one single point of failure as well, which means if your stream goes down, it goes down for everybody. So there's advantages to both sides of that. Okay, more questions. Here's one here. Tech specs, megabytes per second,
Mhm.
resolution, etc., to have the best looking results without saturating the internet connection. So maybe just reiterate what's your go-to, let's call it 1080p uh, streaming setup. In fact, actually, we have a slide here I can pull up while you talk about that, Matt.
Yeah. So let's say we want to do 1080. A lot of people seem to think that you can do 1080 at a very low bit rate. Uh, You can, but the quality is probably going to skip. You're going to see either some drop frame rates or some artifacts. I would typically say at the absolute lowest, in terms of bitrate for 1920 by 1080 that I will, let's call it, support, would be about 6500 kilobits per second, so 6.5 megabits per second for a static bitrate for 1920 by 1080 streaming. Ideally, I would love to see something closer to 8 or 10 megabits per second, but certainly, bandwidth is expensive depending on your internet service provider. So at an absolute lowest compression rate, you say about 6500 kilobits per second seems to be a good place to go. uh,
Sure. Okay.
I always recommend, again, check the FAQs for whichever destination you're trying to stream to. They usually give you a range. So they'll say, if you want to stream to 1280 by 720, it might be range between 2000 kilobits per second and 6000 kilobits per second will be the best. But the thing to also keep in mind is your audio encoding settings. So whether that's in software or as a dedicated hardware devices, platforms like Facebook and YouTube will always want to see AAC 44,000 44.1 kilohertz, and they'll always want to see 128 kilobits per second for the actual bit rate for the audio. So sometimes you might run into issues where I've got all the proper video settings and everything looks great, but I keep getting an error or warning that's saying that something's not right with my stream. So don't forget to double check your audio encoding settings as well.
Yeah. Okay. We have another one about similar kind of thing. Priest walks into a bar. No. This guy, Michael, is saying, a priest asked me, what's the minimal setup to hook up a camera to show a Sunday mass to YouTube or Facebook, right? So maybe a quick primer for someone who just wants to get the congregation up to Facebook and YouTube. We know we're seeing tons of these people right now coming to our website looking for these kinds of solutions. What would you recommend?
Personally, the better you have control of your video and audio source, the better. But if we're talking about a minimal investment having to make, getting a USB capture card and just getting a camera is a good way to go. If you really don't think that a capture card is something that you can do, get a nice quality web camera and then just a USB microphone that can be strategically placed for the specific event, and being able to use software for streaming purposes. So this could be something like a Blue Yeti microphone using USB. And then being able to get a high quality webcam or USB, even a PTZ camera that might be able to position itself accordingly for your specific event.
Sure. And a lot of people don't know they need a capture card. And just to expand on what Matt was saying, if you have a webcam, you're right, you don't need a capture card. Your computer knows exactly how to handle that signal. But any other kind of camera, your computer's not going to know how to handle the signal coming out of that camera. So that's why you need a capture card. It's a very basic device. It requires no configuration at all. Your computer will just see it as though it's a webcam once you attach that. So, but it's a necessary investment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's see what we have. Do we have any other questions here?
Yeah, we do. You look through the list there. There's a bunch of great questions in there. People talking about fixed dropout. Where do you want to go?
What time? I'll see if there's anything here in the comment list as well that might have been.
Sure. Okay. Well, I can give you one right now. Someone's asking, can you explain the video dropout and how you fixed it? So that's from Ronald, wondering what happened during our stream. And actually, I don't exactly know what happened during that stream. I'm guessing it was a mix-up of our layouts. We've got a pretty complex setup here using Zoom, and we're using our Pearl systems, and we have lots of cropping and different layers going on. So it's gotten a little hairy. And at
George,
times,
I can answer that question quickly, just from the back studio room here.
The ghost.
So I did see that, and we posted a comment just on our chat string from our admin account, but we are using a VPN, and when the VPN connection crashed, just due to some local internet slowness here, the computer locked. So what you saw was actually the lock screen on that local computer. So the video was still streaming and the connection was still solid, but instead of seeing Matt and George, you were just seeing a lock screen because we're cropping from that particular source.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Cameron. Cameron is our producer here, and he's making everything work behind the scenes. So Matt and I get to just sit here and chat and do our thing. So
it's true. And if you have the ability to get someone to run your streams, to be the producer that's behind the scenes making all those different layout switches, it does tend to make it a little bit less stressful, because you don't have to focus on 1,000 things, such as being able to provide the presentation, remembering the content, being able to do the live switching, answering questions, being able to review those specific notes. So the more people you can get involved in your live streaming setup and configuration and events, the more successful you're going to ultimately be.
Yeah. So we have another question. Someone is asking how, sorry, I should say their name here, not be so rude. Jeffrey is asking, what are our current setups? So I can show you a little diagram to explain how that works.
We have a slide for that.
We have a slide for that. So great question. Matt and I are talking over Zoom, and that allows us to have a great two-way communication here with very minimal latency, because we need to hear each other's answers and be able to deal with all the audio. So Zoom is a good platform for that. Any conferencing platform will do that with that. And then we're basically cropping those images. So Cameron, our producer, has cropped those images and brought them into Pearl, our hardware encoder, and those are he's built different layouts. So these different layouts, like the one you're looking at right now, where Matt and I are small and we have a big version of our slides, that's all done through Pearl, because you can crop images and resize them and then set up many different layouts. So that's what we're doing today. We're then streaming that through RTMP to Crowdcast, which is acting as our CDN today. And here you guys are watching us there. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yep. And we will make this webinar available as a VOD at the end of this this webinar. It may take a little bit for that webinar to, or the VOD to become available, but it will be available for you guys to watch and rewatch at a later date if you did miss a little bit at the beginning of this presentation, or you've had to cut out for whatever reason.
That's right. And don't forget, ask your questions in the Crowdcast app, and we'll try to get to them before the end of the show today. We've got lots of great questions so far. We've also got some polls in there to capture some of your information as well, just to see what people are doing out there in this time. It's very different now, right?
Absolutely.
A lot more people are interested in streaming video and conferencing than they were a month ago. That's fair to say.
It's definitely thrust a lot of people who are not necessarily used to or comfortable working with technologies to really become comfortable with technologies. So this is why we're here to answer those specific questions, to try to make your lives as easy as possible throughout this entire webinar, live streaming, webcasting type of solution is required. And this could be
ourselves included. We're learning a lot on the fly here.
It's true. And you know, Bill was in another webinar where I was just like right now, occasionally stumbling on my words. And the important thing is recognize that it's never going to be perfect, and you're going to have moments where, you know, you're either going to stumble on your words, or you're going to make a mistake, or maybe the audio is not going to be perfect, or the video is going to suddenly stop, you know, working the way they want. But as long as you can have a decent little chuckle about it, or to address it but not make a big deal out of it, your audience typically won't make a big deal out of it either.
Exactly. Like when my daughter just came in the room a second ago and I had to silently tell her to get lost without using any words. It works, but people are forgivable of that kind of thing right now. One of the things we hadn't really talked about, Matt, was how to get your stream connected. So you've got a computer set up with OBS, or you've got a Perl encoder or some other kind of encoder set up, and you go, okay, how do I actually connect to YouTube or Facebook? So we haven't talked about stream keys. Maybe you can give us a little primer on a typical streaming connection, how that might work.
Sure. So there's two major things that you need if you want to be able to stream anywhere. You'll need the server URL, and you'll need a stream key. And the best way I like to break that down is the server URL tells you which neighborhood you're going to. So in this case, if I'm going to be streaming to YouTube, or if I'm going to be streaming to Twitch, or I'm going to be streaming to Facebook, I need to go to that specific server destination. So I need to go to that neighborhood. And then the stream key, which is kind of the identifier for your specific event, is kind of like the house within that neighborhood. So you're basically pointing it to where you want your content and your software or your hardware device to be able to stream that content. So the stream key is your identifier to say, hey, this is where I need it to end up. So if you're sending a piece of mail, as an example, you're going to put all the appropriate postage information so that it'll actually get there. And the person who's meant to consume or watch the content is actually able to see it. So the stream key, you'll always find that information available in the encoding settings when you're creating your specific event. So on YouTube, you might find that in your event itself under encoding options. On Facebook, same thing. If you're creating a publishing event, you'll find that as well. FAQs are also very helpful if you're using a content delivery network that's not as common. So if you're not used to using Vimeo, there's definitely an FAQ available that'll tell you, hey, here's generally how you'd like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have guides to help us with some of our hardware devices, and even using OBS onto where you would find such information.
We have another question here, not related to stream keys at all. Someone's asking us how we're doing the layouts in our production today and how we're doing the slides. So just to answer that, I'm actually sharing my screen through Zoom. So just like you would in a meeting, I'm sharing my presentation, which I'm running on a second display in my office here. And then of course, Cameron is our producer, is taking that and cropping it and bringing it in as a layout within Perl. So Perl is doing all the layout work, and Zoom is doing all the video aspect of bringing in the different sources. Cameron's pulled up a shot here of our studio showing it's actually a kind of a ghost studio because there's no one there right now.
Yeah.
But that is where everything, all the muscle is right now, because we have a Perl 2 in that studio that's streaming to the world. And Cameron is accessing that through a VPN. So that kind of ties into another question here, Matt.
Okay.
How critical are VPNs for live streams for security? Do you hear, is that a role that you hear of with your customers?
It's honestly not, and VPNs can actually complicate your configuration, your setup a little bit as well. Depending on if you have a firewall that's in place that might be preventing you from being able to access a specific destination. We're using a VPN to tunnel to our specific device that's on a completely different network, right? So the VPN acts as a method for us to be able to spoof or fake that we're on the same network to be able to
Right.
control these specific devices. A VPN is great for general security purposes, but it also adds an extra layer of complexity when it comes to live streaming. So you need to be mindful of that as well. That for generally speaking, you don't really need to worry about it. And if you've got platforms like Facebook, they're using RTMPS, which is a more secure version of streaming, you should be able to do it without a VPN and run into a very successful event without any sort of hiccups.
Hmm. We have another question that you could probably help with, Matt, from Mike
Sure.
Bell, who's been active on the chat here. He's explained this scenario that he's doing a government stream with different computers and council sessions. And he's wondering about bringing in something like Zoom, Teams, or WebEx with his Pearl Mini.
Mhm.
And he's asking which one's the most compatible?
Well, it's kind of a tough call, right? Because it's more of a flavor than anything else. If you're looking to capture the output of these specific computers, like similar to how we're doing our live stream today, you're simply just
Hmm.
capturing the HDMI output with a computer that's running Zoom into Pearl Mini, then it really just becomes a personal preference as to which platform you're most comfortable with.
Right.
If you're looking at actually being able to see all the content of Pearl Mini or Pearl 2 or a hardware encoder in one of those platforms, then it comes down to you need to capture the output, whether it's HDMI out of Pearl Mini as an example, into Zoom using a USB capture card, something that might be like our AVIO HD or AVIO 4K.
Yeah.
So it becomes a compatibility thing. Can the platform that you want that you would like to use, whether it's WebEx or Google Hangouts or Zoom, can it support a USB webcam or a UVC style device like a USB capture card or not? And if it can't, then you're going to run into a little bit of a layer issue. After that, beyond that, it becomes a quality, right? So WebEx supports a maximum resolution of 1280 by 720. And if you're trying to
Uh,
do full HD, then WebEx won't be the right solution for you.
mhm. Yeah, we've used many of them here for our different broadcasts. We're using Zoom today because that's our corporate communication tool for video meetings. But we've used Skype, we've used Whereby, um,
Google
and they all have
Hangouts.
their advantages. So, but in terms from a technology point of view, we're agnostic to the conferencing software. None of them are directly integrated into our hardware. It's not like we have a Zoom client on our equipment or any other client like that. So,
Absolutely.
uh, yeah. So, thanks to
So
everybody for watching today. This is great. Lots of questions in the chat. And lots of some polls that have gone up there too. And the most recent poll, if you haven't answered it, go look at the bottom here of your Crowdcast window where it says polls and vote. The question is, which industry do you represent? We're trying to find out where you're from. We know you're from all over the world, but we see most people here seem to be in a virtual event streaming line of work.
mhm,
Kind of makes sense, right? That's
it would for this time, yeah.
our bread and butter. And we're seeing a lot of people who they wouldn't have called themselves virtual event streaming companies. They were just event streaming companies, and now they're virtual event streaming companies. So
Out of curiosity, George, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've had with streaming, just beyond the physical cameras and audio pieces of gear?
I would say scope creep is a huge one where we decide to try one more thing. So we'll say, okay, we've got a 2-camera setup and a laptop streaming slides or something. We go, that's great. And then we say, you know what? Let's get another camera where it's somebody walking around with that camera and we'll bring that in. Or we
Okay.
decide to bring in others, try to play some video content as well in the stream. So that scope creep, trying to do more things, that's usually where I've seen our failures come in, and we do it like by design. We're trying to push the envelope and learn how to do these things. So it comes with the territory. But when I give advice to people about streaming, it's usually just try to keep it as simple as you can.
Do you find that scope creeping has produced some phenomenal results as opposed to the opposite?
No question about it. But that's kind of the nature of our work here. We're trying to live the pains that our customers go through. So it's a requirement that we take risks and try new things. So for sure. But for somebody who has a really important event they want to stream, they're not in that same camp, right?
I did see a question that did come in, George, and maybe you can speak to this one. Um, Jeff is asking, your advice on camera switching. He says, switching within streaming software doesn't seem to be, as beneficial or doesn't work as well. Could you maybe have any ideas as what would be the better solution?
Phew, that's interesting. Actually, I'd be curious to know, Jeff. Tell us more about what didn't work well. I know it can be complex, like trying to learn how to build layers in Wirecast and vMix. Some of these software programs is a bit, it takes some getting used to. It's not as straightforward as something like Perl, where you just build your layouts and they're very straightforward. So let us know what's going on with you in your case. But
I know that there are
yeah,
also
so
a
I don't
number
know.
of peripheral devices, like USB type devices that you can connect to your computer that give you the odd few buttons that allow you to do switches. And I find that oftentimes, you might be able to find some information if you're using streaming software, where it might give you key options. Where if you want to switch between specific layouts, you would either press M or H or something to do those switches between those
Yeah, the
specific
shortcuts for
keys.
sure.
Yeah,
Hmm.
those tend to be
Yeah,
very
I
helpful
remember
if you're.
learning was it Wirecast I was learning? No, vMix, trying to learn vMix and their camera switching. And it's very powerful, but there's so much complexity to it that it can be, takes a while. There's a bit of a learning curve there. So that's what my experience was. We've got a few minutes left here. We're just about to wrap up. So if you've got questions, please get them into the chat now. There's one more here on the Webcaster X2, Matt. YouTube Go Live issue. Is there an issue with YouTube Go Live? Do you know about this?
Okay, it's something probably best suited for the technical support team to help you with. I
Perfect.
would say email info@epiphan.com. But I do know that YouTube has made quite a few changes very recently due to the increased, system load, people that are consuming and uploading content onto YouTube, and the method in which streaming is taking place. So there are some issues with some specific YouTube accounts that can sometimes create this issue where you might not see it with other accounts. And this could be troubleshooting that's required on the YouTube side, or it might just be a settings issue on the Webcaster side as well. So I would say best course of action, if you're using one of our devices and you're running into an issue, such as the one that you're mentioning here with Webcaster, reaching out to us at technical support would probably be the best place to start, because we'll be able to give you a couple of troubleshooting options or maybe some more in-depth detail that I might not be able to provide right now.
Awesome. A couple more questions here. They're coming in now. People know that we're almost done here. That's great. Jeff is talking about how he's trying to switch cameras in Zoom and it's not straightforward and quick. I would agree. Using conferencing software to do camera switching is going to be janky and not super smooth. That's my experience. But other people might have better tools for that. So I'm afraid I don't have a great answer for how to solve that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, the short of it is conferencing software and streaming software are two completely different beasts. They can be used with alongside each other, or to benefit each other. But conferencing, which is two-way communication between two people, such as how George and I are conversing with each other, being able to hear each other in real time, and being able to, which is kind of a bi-directional communication, compared to live streaming, which is a unidirectional communication, is going to be very, very different. So having a software that you're using for live switching that's dedicated for streaming or broadcasting is going to give you a much more streamlined result.
That's right. So just a reminder to everybody, we're going to be on YouTube and Facebook in an hour. So we have a show called Live at Epiphan, where we go live every Thursday at 3:00, and we talk about mostly video streaming, video recording, video production. So please join us there. And it's also interactive, and put your chats or your comments into the chat there. We can carry this conversation on a little bit towards that one, because we're going to be talking about streaming there and conferencing. So join us there. Matt, I think we're just about done here. I'm looking through the last comments here to see if there's anything that jumps out.
No, I don't see anything else. I'm just running through the comments here. Generally been speaking. See a lot of very specific Perl related questions. Great to see a lot of feedback going on here.
There's one more here about someone's using an ATEM and they're trying to bring in input sources that need to be the same standard. Okay. Using an ATEM, I think ATEMs are restrict you. If you're using 1080p, they expect 1080p for all of your inputs.
Yeah.
Whereas the second part of the question is, does the Perl products allow for multi-standard input sources? The answer is yes. It's completely agnostic to the signal. You'll get any resolution and you can mix and match them galore, and you'll never have to configure them or set them. It'll just auto detect them. So that's one of the advantages over a Pearl compared to an ATEM. So you might try that.
And when you're talking about streaming online, right? If you're over the internet, everything comes out as progressive, right? So 1080p, 720p, broadcast standards, European standards tend to use interlaced, but when it ultimately goes streaming over the internet, it's 99% of the time it's going to be progressive. So if you have the opportunity to get that content into your device in a progressive format, all the better. Less chances of getting banding and other issues you might see with interlace sources if there's a conversion process that does happen.
People talking about switching and needing a quick way to switch. Someone's mentioning the Elgato Stream Deck, and you're right. That's a convenient little USB lo-fi kind of way to do some switching. It sounds like we're about to wrap up here. So thanks, Matt. This has been great.
Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and thank you for all of your questions and for those of you that participated in the polls. If you do have any additional questions, obviously the webinar is coming to an end, but feel free to drop us a line at info@epiphan.com or jump onto our community forums on our website.
Yeah. Nice to talk to everybody, and we'll be around again. We have another show in an hour, so maybe I'll see some of you there. See you, Matt.
See you, George.